I'm not, I would be a poor scientist. I'm not really good with spreadsheets and notebooks in the bee yard, but you do have to keep records. So for me, it's a Sharpie on the outside of the box, and you try different tapes and methods. And for me, the blue painter's tape has worked really well. I grew up around bees. My father had bees, and so did my wife's father. When we got together, tried my hand at bees for a second time, and it was my wife's project, but I quickly got really hooked. And and yeah, so it's kind of started with two colonies, and that was what 2009, I believe. And we've grown every year pretty much, and it's kind of grown to the primary income for us. Got about 250, 260 colonies going to winter. I'm kind of bad at counting. And the past good number of years have been working full time with the kids, so that's quite an adventure as they grow. And let's see. And there we go. So, oh, that was supposed to play. I guess not. Here we go. Yeah, so as James mentioned, lots of mistakes along the way teach you not to do lots of things. But the experimenting is kind of what I enjoy a lot with bees, and that challenge and to learn new things. When I'm going to share things that work well with me, I'm guessing that quite a few won't work for you. But if one or two does, then I feel successful. And I know there's going to be lots of nuances that I'm going to skip over, and that actually might be necessary for things to work. So if you have any questions, please reach out later. I'm going to kind of go through kind of working through equipment, and then working the bees, and then processing the lovely stuff, honey and wax. So starting with equipment, I'm working with a lot of really old equipment that I was able to get from the 70s, actually, from my father-in-law, a lot of it unused. And then a lot of new equipment, a lot of being cheap, building a lot of things. And, with the building coming from wood, my father's a woodworker, really paying attention to trying to build things that'll last. And of course, everyone talks about painting with glue, or using type bond glue for the joints. And I found that going a little bit beyond that really helps my boxes last a lot longer. So for me, I really like using a chip brush to paint it on. Here's my daughter painting. And then after assembling, coming back and painting, let's see, this shows here, painting along any exposed end grain on the corners, the top top edge and the bottom edge of the box, and then also the frame rest. The reason for the top edge and bottom edge is that's where a lot of water hangs out. And I found if I painted that with regular paint, it sticks, and latex paint sticking to itself kind of makes it hard to get the boxes back apart when you actually go to use them. Whereas the type bond, when it hardens, it really soaks into the wood nicely, makes it harder, stronger, but it doesn't stick to itself. And so it makes use a lot easier. And then strangely, painting within the frame rest area, it helps for scraping propolis off if you need to get it off. And that really makes a difference. And for me, and basic method is a chip brush. I like to cut the bristles a little bit shorter. That really, for me, helps just with applying. I've tried some of the other type of paint brushes that are made with silicone bristles, and they just didn't work well. And I use a yogurt container, typically get about a year out of each yogurt container. You get a little glue buildup on the inside, but you can actually pop it out. Downside is some yogurt containers, the lid doesn't really hold the air out quite so you got to make sure it's a really good sealed container. I also find it really useful to use that brush on the frame ends, so I can do a whole group of 10 at a time when I'm assembling frames, and that speeds up my gluing. It gets the glue on all the surfaces, and that really helps. And then also you can take sawdust and mix it with the type bond glue to repair voids, and that has worked well for me, better than using caulk. And especially if the void is a knot hole, let's say on the bottom edge, if you use caulk or something like that that's soft to repair that void, the bees will chew it back out. At least that's been my experience. Whereas the tight bond mixed with the sawdust, you actually end up almost stronger than the wood. It's pretty amazing. And again, that, you know, here I've done the tight bond, but I will then later come back and do all the exposed end grain to help that box survive, hopefully a long time. Part of what allows me to make a living with bees is to be as cheap as possible. So I'm constantly going through, you know, not trash cans, but job sites in the area, scrounging for materials if I can. Frames I like to buy, boxes I like to buy in general. The nukes I make a lot of, but I found a lot of job sites are very happy to let go of scraps of zip sheathing and the Vantech, both of which are made by the same manufacturer, and they have a great glue to them so that they can really survive being in the weather. Of course, if you paint things, they last even longer, so I do that. Bottom boards I do with the zip sheathing, which is a little bit thinner and a little not quite as strong. And then, you know, just because I get a lot of that, it's easier to get than the subflooring. And here you can see I'm using a little bead of caulk, cutting the Vantech just a little bit bigger than the top. And that little bead of caulk actually acts kind of like a telescoping cover. It's the drip edge. And I've kind of moved to using a bit more overhang than my original lids, and just seems to give the hives a little better protection. Of course, then you're also running the risk of wind. And you know, thankfully so far that's worked out okay for me. The Vantech, especially the really thick stuff, can be really heavy, and then bricks on top. And the newest thing, I don't have a picture of it, but I've been playing around a lot with using floor tiles, the 1 foot by 2 foot floor tiles for lids on nukes. And you know, so imagine like a sheet of some kind of plastic, or canvas as an inner cover, or bubble, what is it, double bubble, and then 1.5 inches or so of foam, and then the floor tile, and that's worked really well for me as well. Moving on into the foundation, being cheap again, I like to coat my own foundation with my own wax, because I have a lot of wax, and all my dirtier looking wax doesn't go with candles, and I use it to coat my foundation, because I was finding I had to coat the foundation anyway. But what I found for myself was that if the foam roller rolled it and I went as fast as I wanted to go, it would splatter. So shoving some little you know, toothpicks or something into the end of the foam roller so it actually can't roll. So now you got a wide brush that you can easily brush on. You can see I'm missing kind of the ends. That doesn't seem to matter that much, although generally I do get the whole sheet of foundation a little bit better. And I'm just trying to hit the tops, not trying to soak down inside. So again, if I'm let the roller roll and I went slower, I have more wax going down into the foundation, and that became a little more problematic. I boil the wax multiple times with water to, you know, try to clean it, and, you know, going under the assumption, living in a low ag area, that my beeswax hopefully has less chemicals in it than store-bought foundation that is getting wax from who knows where. And so now moving into the bees, my son Eli. Oh, and if you take kids in the bees, the hands up inside the suit and give them some crackers. It's pretty amazing. They will just sit there and eat crackers and or whatever food, you know, snack. And generally with him, it's all good till he runs out of food, and then it's all right, let's get out of the bees. So on Bee Source, kind of before Facebook was really popular, that's where I spent a lot of my time reading about bees. And this woman, Lori Miller, promoted this idea of half foundation frames, and I really like it a lot. I don't use it a huge amount. Each colony gets 1 or 2 of these frames, and it's typically on the outer edge. But what it allows is the bees to draw a drone comb within the hive, and you get less bird comb between boxes. Concentrates the drone comb, so if you want to do drone removal, it's very easy to take a hive tool and just, you know, slice right around the edge. Also, if it's up in the honey super, you can also slice right around there very carefully, and you've got yourself some cut comb or chunk honey comb. I have found that some hive tools can be a little too sharp, and you can actually shave a little of the plastic foundation. So you know, being careful with that, so you don't get shards of plastic into your chunk comb. That'd be a problem. But what I like about this is you're getting the workers to be in the core of the brood nest. And, you know, to me, that's really nice, because it puts the drones in the more risky area if you have a cold snap in the spring. and it also I don't know, it's a full sheet of drone comb. They would often make some worker comb anyway, so it kind of concentrates the workers where I want. I If I do cut out the drones, it's typically early in the spring, and then I let them build back. But later in the flow, they're a little more hesitant to draw it out, I find. If you have a colony with a lot of drone comb, then they will typically draw worker comb in that area, which is nice. Um, let's see, moving on. Um, not, I would be a poor scientist. I'm not really good with spreadsheets and notebooks in the bee yard, but you do have to keep records. So for me, it's a Sharpie on the outside of the box, and try different tapes and methods. And for me, the blue painter's tape has worked really well. And I've had good luck with the garden markers, and then also the Sharpie Industrial. Here in this picture, this is a picture I took this summer. So, this tape here is from 2022. You can't really read it, but here's 2021 and here's 2020. So I've got, my genetics, and 2020 is getting pretty faint. If the if the tape is facing south, it's about a year. That's about as much as you get out of the marker. But facing north, you get a good number of years. And so for me, that's kind of my method of keeping records. MMQ means mark mated queen, got my graft date, treatment free, and mite counts coming along through the summer. And this is a great queen. Actually rose in mite counts, and then late August and August we're back to 0. So she's actually scored a 4 on a Harbo, and I'm so looking forward to doing the UBO on her in the spring. See what that goes. And hygiene in the hives, we talk about different methods of hygiene. And for me, I work barehanded, so I wash my hands a lot, but the hive tool then becomes a nice route of transmission. And anytime you have a lot of bees, you do see nasty stuff occasionally, so I try to keep my hive tools clean as possible. In the bee yard, shoving it in the dirt can get a lot of propolis or honey off pretty quick. And then I always have a little spray bottle of rubbing alcohol. If I see something nasty, I always spray it and my hands down. My home bee yard, though, I have a hydrant, and so I've got Dawn dish soap attached to it, and I can quickly spray it, and then a stainless steel scrubby, cold water, and that just takes any of the propolis off really, really quick. And yeah, paint's gone too pretty quickly. And keeping within the hive tool, I've found I love the J hook, working with a lot of nukes, but I had 2 issues with it. One, the biggest was I like the older style scraper hive tools, in that you can slip them in between the box corners without damaging the wood as much. And the J hooks, they have pretty harsh bevel. So keeping a tub of water to keep it cool, but you can grind the J hooks down to a much more even bevel, a lot less wood damage. And then on the actual hook part, it's hard to see, but I've taken off a good bit right in this area, and that really helps me to slip into a tight colony, and it doesn't push the frames quite like the fat J hooks. And why they make that hook so fat, I'm not sure. Frames are not that heavy. It doesn't have to be that stout of a metal. And I use a lot of oxalic acid for keeping my bees healthy. And always struggle with using old silicone caps and trying to fill the and came across, I think it was on Beekeeping Hacks, the Facebook group, someone mentioned using a syringe, cutting off the tip, and that is just amazing. You can just jam it and get a nice packed dose so that it actually doesn't fall out of the cup. I'm just making a tall tower there so you can see it. What I did find was that if you Sharpie the measurement levels, you calibrate it to a scale, the Sharpie doesn't last. What do you know? Oxalic acid is a powder, is an abrasive. So scratching in your dose lines, that lasts really well. And definitely speeds up my treatment. In my bee yard, I've got all different size hives, so I'm adjusting my treatment for every single hive. And one thing that worked really well for me in my operation, and I don't know, I would think it would work for most people, but the typical queen castle has a sawn groove for the division board. And I found that to be problematic in the sense that you sometimes end up with colonies that are different strengths and you can't move it. It would get propolized in really strong, and ended up with a bunch of really thin plywood used to protect windows that were shipped. Got them out of a job site dumpster and cut my own division boards with a little ear. So now I can slide them anywhere I want within a colony. And originally I was doing a lot of my nukes with two queens in the early spring. And so I'd have a 2-frame side and a 3-frame side. Drop this division board in, goes all the way to the solid bottom board. And my 3-frame side would have I'm using the thing on the wrong screen. I think you can see this. The 3-frame side, this is its entrance out this board hole. And then the 2-frame side, they would come out the front landing board. With the landing board would have a block of wood to block the 3-frame side from going out that end. And for me, I found the 3-frame worked better than the 2-frame side. So now I've gone to just actually doing mostly in 10-frame equipment and using that block of wood to block off the entrance for this, the other side. And this year I kind of experimented with raising a lot of queens and mediums. I've got 2 queens in here. Once they're mated, you can throw a queen excluder on and throw supers on. And I would manage them that way through the dearth of the summer. And in the fall, when you start having queen issues and you need a queen, I had queens that I could pull. I grab a queen out of one side, pull that division board out because it's flexible, and maybe I could actually just slip a piece of newspaper in if I want to. But what's nice with that is that I have a full-size colony ready for winter. I didn't have to do any combining or anything like that. The bees are all kind of used to each other already, and that's worked really well for having spare queens when you need them for my own operation. I have a lot of colonies in my own home yard, and robbing is an issue. And trying various different methods, eventually kind of landed accidentally on just using the 1/8-inch hardware cloth. I was bending it as a folded V to move hives, and then realized, oh, I can fold it back a little bit, and that will allow the bees to have an entrance. But with solid bottom boards, it gives them more ventilation across the front. And if the robbing gets really bad, I actually fold it all the way out and just give them a little bit of a slot. And the robber bees go in the area down here, they can't get in, but the bees from the hive can go in and out of that slot. And that's worked really well for my operation. It has drawbacks, of course, mice being one. If I fold about 3/4 inches, then it allows me to slide the that video played a little odd. It allows me to slide this screen over and have about a 3/8 on each end going into winter, and that seems to work for keeping the mice out. And when I do OAV, it leaks OAV out, so I up my dose a tiny bit to accommodate for that. But the extra ventilation is really huge, and I didn't have any robbing this year, which was great, even though we had a really bad dearth. But swarms, oh yeah, I get swarms a lot, especially with the mating nukes. And you're in your bee yard, and you're at least for me, I'm out there almost every day, and the swarm takes off, and you're like, I want that, and reading about some of this Russian scions and stuff, I would also keep queen lure, which is here. This is dead queens and rubbing alcohol with some lemongrass oil mixed in, and I'd run around with that queen lure and dab things, and occasionally a swarm would land on it. And I don't know, one time I thought, well, what if I dab it on something like a stick or something, hold it up high, and comb is nice and easy. So I did that, and I guess this year I probably caught 10 swarms doing this method. The bees really are attracted to it, and it's very easy to then bring them down, use a bungee now rather than duct tape to the pole, and just set them into a hive. And this pole here is 34 feet long, and I can tell you bees on the end of a 34-foot pole are heavy. That's really hard to lower down, but that was really neat. The swarm actually had almost gone out of sight, and I put that pole up there, and it was really awesome to watch them reverse course and come back and land. So let's see, we'll move on here. But what's even better than trying to catch them in the air is catching them before they go in the air, right? So seeing some of those early skep beekeeper ideas where they have a big mesh kind of cone almost at the entrance of the skeps. One time I'm out there and watching a nuke swarm, and I took my veil off and shoved it over the entrance and caught the swarm. And it was like, oh, this is great, but maybe something's better than my own veil. And the insect habitats is what I found work really well. Some of the ones that are square have a zipper along the bottom, so you can just open it up just a little bit, and you can see the bees here piling out of the hive and right into the insect habitat. And if you're lucky, you get the queen in there before she flies, and take them over to wherever you want them to be and dump them in, and easy peasy that way. It's really pretty awesome too to have a whole insect habitat full of a swarm as they're cruising out. It's just such a cool experience. When you use queen excluders, you end up with issues with drones. sometimes. And I have a lot of foundationless comb, and so lots of drone comb high in my supers, and I would end up with drones and then needing them to get out. And most of my equipment is migratory type style lids, so I didn't have upper entrances that some people have with their other type of inner covers. So I keep a bunch of shims in my van, and if I need them and that seems like the right route, I'll just quickly make up an upper entrance above my queen excluder. What you see here is doing it during the beginning of the dearth, where I need to get some drones out, but I don't want robbing to happen. So I've used it, kind of used that third shim to make the entrance a little bit smaller. And you know the yeah, queen excluders are tough. That I've had a long kind of, I think a lot of us beekeepers have had a long challenging relationship with queen excluders, the pros and cons. And basically, as bees don't like to go through them, it really discourages movement. But for me, at my scale, I really need the queen excluders to keep the queen from going up to the fifth super and laying in the drone comb, and then having to deal with that. I used to blow so many queens onto the ground as I was trying to get bees out of my supers to harvest honey, and there'd be a queen up there. I didn't know it. So I've gone to using queen excluders, but as most of us have dealt with the challenges of having a queen excluder stop bee movement. Really, I struggled with that for a while, and slowly have come to the conclusion that the honey dome was kind of the challenge for me. Is if the bees have everything they need below the queen excluder, honey, brood nest, why go through it? And what they want to do is reproduce. So, it just doesn't make sense to them to go through that annoying queen excluder. They got everything there. And the nectar flow kicks in, and well, let's backfill the brood nest and swarm. And so as I started to pay attention to that honey dome and play with different methods of manipulating my hive to get the honey dome out of there, my struggles with the queen excluders went down. So, if you use a single brood box, a deep brood box, and you have all that brood right there, they got to put the honey somewhere, and they wanted to put it above the brood. So they'll go up through that queen excluder really readily. But there are other issues that come along with the single box management that I struggle with personally. I liked having a little bit more of a buffer. And so, kind of where I've landed slowly is running my hives upside down, in the sense of the deep box on top and a medium on the bottom. And it's kind of the opposite of what I have been exposed to most of my life. But for me, I found it really has worked really well. So I'm going to try to spend a little bit of time to kind of walk through the pros of it, and there's certainly some cons. In this area of Virginia, our average yield with honey is in the, I think, 40 to 60 pounds per colony, probably averaging out about 50 per year. And using this method and queen excluders on all but I think two hives this year, I averaged 140 throughout my whole operation. So I think my best yard was 150 pound average. So it can work. But definitely has its little pros and cons to it. So we'll start in the summer. Here I have a brood nest that is, kind of got the honey dome here. Brood nest is in the middle of the hive, and coming out of the nectar flow, we got a lot of pollen. I kind of made this talk thinking of giving it in the summer, so that's why I started with summer here. And then as we move into the fall, the brood nest is moving down. Hopefully, if we have a fall flow. We had a bad drought, so my fall flow unfortunately had to be a bit of feeding. But going as I get to winter, I want my brood nest all the way at the bottom. And what I really like with this is in the fall, you have a lot of robbing pressure, and there's almost always brood in the bottom of the deep frames. So I never crack the boxes. I can pull a frame in the middle of the deep hive body, find brood, see that on queen right, close it back up. And if you have a lot of colonies, the less time you have hives open, the less chance robbing is going to start. It also means a lot less lifting. I want to have a good little bit more than a medium's worth of honey on my colony going into winter. So if I had the medium on top, I'm having to lift this heavy box off so I can get to the brood nest down below, because I need that medium to be full of brood. I mean, full of stores. So weirdly, I feel like I actually have less lifting with a deep on top than having a medium on top, which a little counterintuitive. Propolis seal stays intact because I'm not separating boxes. And then as we move through winter, the bees move up. and by early spring, they're typically up at the top, in the top deep. Hopefully some stores, sometimes a little low, so I'll feed them if I need to. And then that brood nest is expanding out. But what's nice is during that period of that early spring buildup, typically that medium is empty. And I then am free to rotate that up for swarm management. Something that I found if I had a medium on top, I couldn't do. Um, and so having the medium down below, typically the deep is big enough for that early spring brood nest. And so that I could, rotate without stressing the colony and splitting the brood nest during a cold snap. And so I do a rotation, kind of early spring, and then the bees are able to move up into that empty, gives them that sense of space. A lot of us feel like it helps with swarm prevention to have that sense of space. And what's also nice is as they move up, they are making a new honey dome up in that medium. And sometimes if the nectar flow is kicking on early, I'll throw on a medium with mostly drawn comb just to give them more sense of space. But what I want to do is, as the flow is really kicking in, to get a queen excluder on sooner than later. Because again, a lot of my supers are drone comb from doing foundationless for many years. And I will end up with a lot of drones up there. And that gets to be a challenge for honey production. So this is kind of, for me, the revelation was to get rid of the honey dome at the point of putting on the queen excluder. And, kind of almost like going to a single deep, if you have that brood touching the queen excluder, the bees want to store above it and they'll just go right through the queen excluder. So at the point I put on my queen excluder, that's shown in orange here, I am reversing my boxes again. And then, of course, we are splitting the brood nest a little bit. At this point, typically brood nest is pretty huge, and I don't feel like it splits it too much. And I wouldn't do it before cold snap. But typically at this point in the spring, it's pretty warm here, and it doesn't seem to really affect them too much. But at that point, I'm adding on more supers, and it's this year within I'd say about 80 colonies at least. I had doing this method. None of them hesitated to go through the queen excluder, which was really nice. A bit, nice change from some of my earlier struggles. Pretty quickly, they'll refigure the brood nest and start storing pollen down below. And that's why I like the medium, is that they're putting the pollen where they want it. They have room to put it there. And when I did single deep, I would end up with pollen up in my honey supers, and that could be a challenge. It also means that, for doing swarm checks, I'm tipping the deep up and checking for queen cells. And that's, to me, really nice because I'm not exposing myself to the meanest bees near the entrance. I'm not having to bend over as much either. Both of those I find nice. So I can, just quickly slide the deep, towards me a little bit and then prop it up, look for queen cells. If I do end up with a lot of, honey being stored in that deep and it's still early part in the flow, I don't want them to, start backfilling too much and having too much of a honey dome again. So I will pull frames of capped honey or nectar out. And that goes into my nuke production. Also helps me rotate comb. And I'm throwing in typically 2 frames of foundation, either depending on the weather, either on the outside of the brood nest or sometimes more central. And if I come back in 10 days and they haven't drawn that foundation, I know they're going to swarm. It's almost 100%, unless the nectar flow totally cut off. But that to me is just an incredible telltale sign. If they don't draw the foundation, they're want to swarm, and I start looking pretty quickly. Let's see, any other, ideally, a lot of my carney hives, towards the end of the flow, they would naturally start to move the brood nest down and shrink it down, which was really wonderful. And I could end up with enough stores in that deep as I head out of the flow. I try to get my stores off, my honey, pulled and extracted before robbing starts. And so that also works well with, condensing the hive, as we're heading into our hot, we have a pretty hot, dryish summer typically here in Virginia. So, by July, I'm getting my honey off, and any residual flow that the bees get, they can then store and push that brood nest down, hopefully. And then that also helps with hive beetles. They don't have a giant colony to protect with the hive beetles. But, I've taken a lot of their food off, so it definitely has a negative in the sense that in my operation, I do need to feed more than I would like. And I, probably could leave a medium on, but again, a lot of my comb has drone comb, so I don't want to send colonies into winter with a super full of drone comb on top. That wouldn't be good for them. I like to experiment, so I don't do every colony like this for honey. I do a lot of all deeps, a lot of all mediums, and still want to experiment. And with all deeps, I've had really good luck moving one of the deeps above the queen excluder, and then I've got a full deep of honey coming into the dearth and for winter, and that's awesome. It works really well for me, but it's heavy, and that's a huge negative. Taking that heavy full deep off, just it's not fun. The all mediums, I, I like to run my all medium hives with two mediums in my brood nest. So I'm moving that third medium that I want for winter, typically up above the queen excluder, making sure I don't, pull it for extracting, because it's got a lot of a lot of brood comb, and also possibly some sugar honey stores from the past. So, give that back to them at the end of the flow. But I found this method of, basically anything to disrupt the honey dome when you add the excluder makes a huge difference. Hope that's useful. For me, it was kind of really revolutionized my success with queen excluders. But honey's off now, and bees are hungry. My home nuke yard, working with kids, I have way too many bees. I've got, this year I had up to 170. Actually, during the nuke season, there's 300 colonies, but it allows me to work. And the kids are playing nearby. I play in the bees, they play in their little playground area, and we can talk, and I can easily help them with whatever they need, and take breaks. But it means I need to feed more, because there's a lot of resource competition. And especially when the kids were younger, I'd often be out at night feeding, and found that jar feeders work great at night. And with all those bees, a leaking jar feeder on the top means the robbing goes in the place where the entrance is not, and that really helped dealing with robbing. My outyards, though, I don't use jars or buckets as much for wind issues and other critters, so mostly internal feeders. But jar feeders have an issue, which is rust, right? The lids can stick, and I used to battle that for so long until I can't remember how I came across the petroleum jelly. Someone told me, or if I figured it out myself, but it is amazing. Just a little dab of petroleum jelly on the threads, and you're good for a year, typically. And then in the fall, when the bees are propolising everything they can, if you don't need to feed for a while, but then, oh gosh, I need to go back and feed, they propolize those holes shut in the jar feeder. So I keep a safety pin attached to my bee suit, so I can easily poke those holes out, and not searching for that perfect little tiny twig to reopen the holes. I tried torching it at one point, and that didn't work out too well. It rusted a lot of my lids, because took off the whatever the coatings are. And of course, jars get moldy. So on that, I believe it was the Beekeeping Hacks Facebook page, someone mentioned using a toilet brush, and it's awesome. You cut the handle off, use a new one, and it is so much fun. Also interesting if you let the kids do the soaping, get a bit too much. With my frame feeders, tried all different types. For myself, though, I didn't like the cap and ladders all that much. Had issues with hive beetles hiding out underneath, bees getting in and dying, and fermenting, issues with the syrup fermenting. And so I like to take off the cap and ladders if I have that, and using a wire. That really made a big difference, rather than the clips or whatever. But a little electrical wire, drill 2 holes, fold it so that it can't move in or out. And then I just use regular 3/4 inch wood stock. It has to be loose, cannot be tight, but two floats on wide feeders, 1 float on narrow. And then to try to keep robbing down, a lot of my outyards, I have fabric or Reflectix inner covers. I can just peel back a little bit and pour through that, and I get less robbing issues, and less mad bees too. It turns out, if you don't expose much area. I don't have many traditional inner covers. I'm jealous of the people that have amazing sugar pump systems, but I have a system that for me works really well, which is I'm lucky enough to have installed a hot water solar hot water system on my workshop. So all summer long, I've got about 170-degree water coming out of a hose tap. So I've got a hose hooked up to a spray wand that has a fan setting, and a 5-gallon bucket, I can dump a 25-pound bag of sugar in. And if I angle the fan just right. This is my daughter, doing the filming. Um, but if I angle it right, it's, about a minute, I can mix a bucket. And I try to do about a 3 to 5 syrup, although I'm so intrigued by Bob Binney's sharing the research of a thinner syrup, so I might try that next year. But the thicker syrup doesn't ferment as fast, and that sure is nice. And there we are finishing one batch. I hope that video is playing okay for everybody. Um, when I put the lid on, I like to have the pour spout just above that line that you would have between the handle ends, and that allows you to pour without the glugging. So I can pour into a pretty small, like a jar hole or whatever I need to pour into, and that made a big difference too, for me. And you get a little bit of residue sugar, hanging at the bottom. Let me go back there. So there we go. You get a little bit of residue, at the very end when you're pouring out, and that's nice because that thicker sugar syrup that, whatever doesn't mix totally. As I get about halfway through the bucket pouring, I'll stir it up a little bit just by shaking it or swirling. But whatever doesn't come out, the pour spout is typically high enough sugar content that it doesn't ferment in the bucket until the next time I go to use it. If I mix it perfectly thoroughly, then I have fermentation issues in my bucket. Extracting, I'm still using a cold knife in my operation, which is kind of ridiculous with the amount of honey I'm doing, but I really like it. It's just an old TV serrated knife from this, I think the 80s maybe. And I can tell you it's not really good on your back to do it with a sleeping child. But move past there, thankfully. The big thing that really made my operation more successful with extracting, I typically can pull honey one day, but then stuff with kids, I can't really extract the same day I pull. So to store that honey for a day or two before I extract was kind of critical. And we're in a really hot, humid area, so the humidity can lead to moisture issues with the honey. So I've used a dehydrated table for quite a few years. We're pretty simple, 2x4s. I can do 4 stacks of supers. I run 2 dehumidifiers in it, blowing the hot dry air up through the supers. And then I have another fan set up with air filters to blow up enough airflow through the other supers. But this could be scaled up and down. The guy that shared this with me just does 1 stack, and he has a side blow dehumidifier. It's quite a nice little simple system. But what that means is you have really hot, dry air blowing up to the supers. The top's open. So typically I'm getting about 90, 95 degree temperature coming out the top, and very low humidity, about 25%. Which means after 24 hours, my uncapped honey is now drier than my capped. So this spring we had a really heavy flow hit. I didn't have enough comb, so I was extracting supers that were almost all uncapped, very little capped, and my end result honey was about 15% moisture after just 24 hours on this table. Wonderful tasting honey. And the big just don't cover the top. Let the air out is critical. You can get so hot that you melt things down. So keeping a thermometer on the top is really useful to keep it from getting too hot and having a comb melt down, which would be not pretty. And it also, for me, with the serrated knife, the knife cuts through the comb better at that 90 or so 92 degree temperature, and of course extracting works better too with hot honey. I pull super off of my stack on the dehumidifier table and step over 1 foot, 2 feet, and set it down on another table where I have a little block of wood. And it's just super simple, but it's a risk saver. That little block of wood pushes all my frames up. You can see how it's a little bit narrower than I'm pointing at the wrong screen here. The block of wood's a little bit narrower than the super above. So as I set it down, it's just pushing on the bottoms of all my frames, and it pops all the propolis up. And now I can pull the frames out without having using a tool, which definitely for myself makes a big difference. I filter straight from the extractor into buckets for storage. I'm not quite at the barrel stage yet. I like to use a 200 micron filter, which is fairly fine. I feel like the honey comes out looking clearer and no little specks. And I just use 1 filter, nothing staged. But filtering straight into buckets means I want to fill the bucket, right? So taking old buckets I don't like in the offset tin snips, you can quickly cut rims that you can set on top of the bucket that you're filling, and then now your bucket filter is up above the level of the top of the bucket, so you can fill the bucket all the way. And I really like these kind of filters rather than the stainless steel ones, because everything's sealed. Like if there's a bee flying in my workshop, it can't get into my honey bucket. I've slid things over so you can kind of see the honey down in there. But, it means I can't see in there either. So I overfilled a lot of buckets until I came across this really simple idea, which is a light. So you can see the level of your honey in the bucket. And it's just so useful to know where you are in the filling. And picture to the left is proof that even doing that, you can still overfill. Caught that one just in time. And then crystallizing honey is, it's a big issue. Some years more so than others. This year was pretty low crystallizing, which is really nice. But past years, I've had really, really bad issues with crystallizing honey. And it always crystallizes from the bottom of the bucket. And most of the methods I've seen for decrystallizing, people are putting a light bulb in a cabinet. And two things I've found, or I guess three issues I have with that is, one is if it breaks, now we've got glass where we're storing food. Two, you're putting the heat, it's a really high point source heat, and I had my issues with that were getting too close to the plastic bucket accidentally and melting a little bit, right? And the crystals are at the bottom of the bucket, right? So, and the light bulb's typically up higher, and heating from the bottom really makes a big difference. So I've moved over to using heat pads. This particular pad is actually made for floor radiant heating, but they sell them as heat pads. Need about 60 watts, and a lot of the heat pads are like about half that. So here in this situation, you can see I have a heat pad in the back of the fridge. There's an old kegerator someone gave me, and another heat pad underneath. But I'm putting the heat pad shimmed off the bottom, but with two soapstone stones, so that the heat pad can't get damaged as I put the bucket in and out. And yeah, I've learned that experience, setting buckets on straight on a heat pad and having wires short inside, and yeah, plastic meltdown. Thankfully, no fire. Muffin fan, I feel is kind of optional if you're heating from the bottom. But I already have it in there, so I let it run. And then for me, a temperature controller I feel is really critical, so you don't overheat. And it allows you to really regulate that temperature and not damage the quality of your honey. And then, last issue that I wanted to share that's made a huge difference for me is, I run a solar wax melter all summer as I'm extracting all the uncappings, all the, after draining, that all goes in there. And then also later in the summer as I'm, culling comb, I'm throwing, lots of comb in. And slum gum is just so sticky, and I just struggle for years. How do you get it off? Do you wait till it's hot, and then I'm opening up the solar wax melter, and the bees want to get in there? It's just a whole mess of chaos, or it's too hot for me to actually touch. When it's cold, it's too stuck, and eventually ended up getting silicone mats for something else, but realizing that, oh wait, if I put that in the bottom of the wax melter, it allows it, nothing sticks to silicone, right? And so the slum gum just pops right off. And this is a poor video in the sense that I'm using one hand to try to pop it out. With two hands, it's like 2 seconds, everything falls out. It's just wonderfully easy to clean, and it really improved the quality of my wax too. Taking that slum gum out each day and then before putting in the next batch meant that that coloration or whatever the contaminants are in it wouldn't affect the next batch of wax. And so my wax comes out looking way better for candles. The other thing, and this is my old wax melter, you can see there's some rock wool, and that insulation allows in Virginia, we have pretty mild winters. I can melt wax in January often if it's a nice, good sunny day, because everything stays insulated in there. And I've double pane glass that doesn't have any really old glass is what you want. Anything that has any of the solar heat gain reflectings, most modern glass just blocks too much of the heat that you want from the sun. And yeah, it's pretty. I love the wax melters. Free melting from the sun. So there's my presentation. I hope something was useful in there. And talking about equipment and everything, I just want to stop and say, the bees are what's so awesome, and we can really focus so much on everything, but just to step back and just be in awe of how cool they are as insects. So, and I guess I need to figure out how to get out of this so that we can are we there?
Yeah, you're still here.
Okay, cool. I just realized things went wacky on my screen, so I was worried that I was talking without a presentation happening for a second.
No, oh yeah,
Right.
You're talking to yourself for
Right.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I muted everything, so I wouldn't have known if you were texting me.
No, no, that was great. Thanks, Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. I believe, you're giving a talk for the SBGMI winter conference February 24th, aren't you? What are you going to be talking about in February?
Not this. It'd be about raising queens. Yeah, tips and tricks and things I've found really useful raising queens at a medium scale.
So,
Um,
so this was good, but that's going to be great, right? It's going to be spectacular, and people should sign up right now.
yeah, that is the plug we want to do, right? You're good. Yeah.
Lots of thanks and appreciation for you sharing your knowledge in the comments. I don't know. I saw one picture question from Matt Kobe. I think it looks like Matt got his answer.
Oh, here we go. All right. Now I can see some. But yeah, I'd love any questions, any comments, any criticisms. Great too. Like we're always learning. Um,
Yep, you're on a wild journey.
oh, there we go.
It says you're on
All
a
right.
wild journey. Thank you for the wonderful talk. Good presentation, Ryan. Thank you so much. Yeah, we appreciate everybody else coming out and sticking around and listen to both of our wonderful presenters. And thank you to them for their time tonight on a Wednesday, this holiday season when everybody's running around like chickens with their heads cut off.
It looks like there is something about the silicone caps. I'm trying to understand what that
Yeah,
is.
the caps that you were using were for an Instavap, is that right?
Oh no, this is a very old Jono, the kind of one of the early pioneers of homemade style vaporizers. I run typically two vaporizers, five caps. So I'm
Where do you get your
constantly.
caps? I think was the question.
Oh, where do I get them? Oh, I you can get them. Yeah, various the people that sell the vaporizers sell them. I just recently just bought a pack of 100 of them from the manufacturer. Maybe it was 200. It is a lot. That should last me a while. They definitely don't last that long, at least with my vaporizers. I go through a lot of caps. That's unfortunate. The new style, with integrated plungers really seem like a good step up in that way. And safer too, not having a cap blow off is got to be a plus. The silicones, when they blow, they don't go very far. Like I think the ones coming from Europe with the Teflon and the O-ring, it sounds like they can really blow pretty dangerously.
Scott
But
Neal had a question about your success with using oxalic acid.
oh, it's all I use pretty much. And nothing's perfect. So I'll share my overwintering losses. But know that I'm doing a lot of other things, with queen rearing that involve brood breaks and, allow me to probably be more successful with oxalic acid than maybe a backyard beekeeper would be. But so going back, let's see, 4 years ago, 6% winter loss, and then 3%, 3%, and last year was 0%. So, I feel okay with that. I definitely see in this late summer some pretty rough looking brood patterns at times. And those are the ones that get a brood break via requeening. And then the OA works wonderfully for that for me. So it, but I spend a lot of time with a mask on, which is not much fun. And yeah, especially when the kids were small, it was always really challenging to schedule time that I could vaporize and not have them near me, because a 2-year-old doesn't understand stay back, and we know the vapor is not safe. So
Oh
it
man,
was
they
that
sure
was
don't.
zero option, to have them around when I was treating. They had to be away. Now they know to respect me. When I tell them to stay away, they will, thankfully. But yeah, when they were young, that was not an option. um, yeah, so it's a mites are such a challenge. I know this winter my losses, and I'll probably talk about in the February talk. My losses are going to be greater this winter because I ran 120 colonies treatment free, as a means of trying to select breeder queens to be hygienic, or to select hygienic breeder queens. And as colonies mite counts grew, they would get knocked out of the program. But sometimes that would be a really fast growth. You could do 0, 0, 0, and then bam, you hit a 30, and it's like, whoa, what happened? How did that
Yeah,
happen
where
so
did that
quick?
come
And
from? Yeah.
yeah, and that can go south really fast. So I know I was, behind the curve on treating those, whereas in the past I would have been ahead of the curve, keeping the mites down before they become a problem. I'm tickled though. Now I've got 7 colonies that, had mite counts, typically in the 1 to 0 range in September. So without treatments. And so those are my potential breeders. They have good Harbo scores and they'll get a UVO in the spring. I'm really excited to try that. And we'll see how that goes. But to know that I have hygienic breeders for raising queens versus going on the faith that, breeder queen I bought is hygienic is really nice. It's a big difference in my head, at least.
Yeah,
And
yep.
yeah,
It feels more organic too. You participated in the process of raising that queen up and selection, and you know the
absolutely.
story behind it. So
And it's really depressing though when you have a wonderful queen, just an amazing colony, and then they score badly or might, go out. I had a lot of really awesome colonies that I've really liked a lot, and they didn't make the cut, which was really too bad. So,
anybody
but
else have any questions, or if you wanted to turn on your microphone or your camera, we won't boot you for exposing your face to have a chat. If you want to talk bees, feel more than welcome. We'd be happy to see you.
that'd be great.
I haven't
I'm
seen
scared of them.
anybody come calling for Ryan yet, so I think you're still free to talk.
It looks like we're kind of, let's see, we got da, 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 da.
An early end of the winter this year and an early start to the spring made a big increase for mites.
Yeah, that was a big fear I had too, for sure. It was strangely for most of my colonies, the count stayed really low through July, and then it was, August, when that explosion happened. It was later than I expected. I expected it to grow faster. Um,
So how
because
frequently
that
are you
early.
counting? Are you doing once monthly?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, once they leave that queen breeding group, then no, I'm not counting once monthly. I don't have time. So and then anybody that swarmed, they were mean, I have zero tolerance for mean bees. I work in shorts and barehanded and have kids around. And so there were lots of other criteria besides mites that would knock them out. So, yeah, um
Yeah,
yeah,
my
bad.
favorite thing this year was I came across a colony that was, really stacking the honey supers. And they were just booming with bees. And I think it got to a point where the colony was so full. I started noticing the brooding. I mean, there was still flow and they should very much still be wanting to brood, if you will, but there were so many bees that it's like they were like, okay, we're taking a break. There wasn't a lot of, brooding going on. It was very minimal. But then after checking it for mites, it was pretty high and definitely not showing any telltale signs of resistance on the Harbo scale, and just really broke that entire colony down mechanically and removed every bit of brood and almost all of the bees and just left the queen and uh,
Sorry.
8 frames of bees, and they turned around and built that box right back up to another 3 boxes full of brood honey and bees, um, and washed I think one mite in August or late July, something like that. So those
Nice.
those mechanical interventions can work. They just it's a time commitment, right? You got to make a decision on what works for you in that regard.
Yeah, so true. Looked like someone was asking about intentional brood breaks for oxalic in summer. I wanted to show if I could see if I can do this. Share screen. Here's a video of a colony that is that showing now?
So you got to share your
Here we go.
screen.
Yeah, is that sharing? Oh, here we go. Oh, that button. There we go. Is that showing now?
Yes.
Okay, this is a colony that washed 30 in July. And I messed up. Let me see if I can kill the audio on this. I'm not sure how to do that within a video. Well, anyway, so I missed oxalic because we were traveling, and so this is actually the new queen and the first round of brood and the amount of mites that got into that cat brood. So they'd had a brood break, but it's very clear that without some treatment during a brood break, it wasn't enough. You can see mites everywhere. These are little nymphs. Every single larva had, at least 5 or 6 mites on it. Um, and here's the actual pupa,
Oh, wow.
right? Pretty bad. Amazing PMS. I mean, things were just horrible. I let's see if I can pause that share. Here we go. There we go. So I treated that. I pulled the cap brood. There was just 3 frames that had started to cap. I pulled that out and did an oxalic acid vapor, and their brood pattern's spectacular later in the fall. You know, they rebounded dramatically. And yeah, so I do a fair amount of queen rearing throughout the summer, and that allows me to have a lot of brood breaks. And I am got myself lost on the computer here again. Here we go. How do I stop share? There we go. Yeah, so anyway, that really made a huge difference for me. You know, in my nuke yard, I'm raising queens constantly, and so I'm just, once a week throwing oxalic acid vapor, and a tenth of the hives are, in that period of brood break. I just can't schedule it where I have a whole yard ready, with brood break at once. And yeah, that's kind of not a great answer to that question, but it's always fun to show gory mite pictures. Um,
Yeah, we need something to talk about. There's not enough to talk about when it comes to bees.
The temperature too high for oxalic. I don't know if there is one, and that's what's really nice in the summer because not much ounces. When it's 90. Actually, when I took that video, we were in a heat wave in September, and it was 99 degrees. And yeah, I was doing oxalic acid vapor, and it's the question is what temperature is too hot for the beekeeper to do it. The mask on, it's miserable. And am I doing any caging? No. I try to run new queens into my hives each year going into winter, unless it's a queen I really like and want to keep as a potential breeder or for some other reason. So generally, rather than caging, I'm taking the opportunity to pull out the old queen, drop a queen cell in, and I'm getting a brood break, which you would get with caging. But at the end of that, I'm also getting a new queen. So I have not played with caging myself. I could, yeah, I'd be curious about it. Have you ever played with that? Or Dan, have you? Come on,
Caging
jump in.
queens. Yeah.
Yeah,
Not for brood breaks.
it's a neat concept.
Yeah, I've been doing it for a few years now, and it works great in combination with oxalic treatment in summer.
I would imagine. I mean, you're getting the perfect scenario with no cap brood, right? And
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of concern. Beekeepers always ask me, "Well, is your queen going to shut down?" and that sort of thing. And my experience has been they come out like bricklayers.
really, that's great.
How many days in the cage, Dan?
Cage for 14, 15 days, wait 7 days, and hit hard twice in a row with oxalic.
Yeah,
Nice.
there's
Makes a lot
a
of sense.
presentation on YouTube. If you Google Ralph Buchler, Buchler, sustainable beekeeping. I think it's a series of 4 videos. It might be the 3rd video where he talks about the queen cage method and the studies that were performed on that, as well as using oxalic acid in response to excessive infestations, over threshold, or colonies that were demonstrating that they were not performing adequately and required an intervention. Because you also want to get toward the middle of the summer and late summer, you're going to run out of time to do something like a brood break that's going to be effective enough for that colony to overwinter successfully. So you're going to kind of be up against it when it comes to non-chemical interventions. Yeah, Ralph on the National Honey Show. That's right. Yep. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate you coming on tonight, sir.
Thanks.
And it was good
Thanks a lot
catching
for
up
having
with
me.
you. And we'll see you for sure in February. We're looking forward to it. We'll touch base before then. And thank you everybody else for your support, and everybody who registered and showed up, and to everybody else that's going to show up for the recording. Thank you for coming, and we'll talk to you later. Have a good night. See
Sounds
you
good.
later,
Take
Ryan.
care. See
Night,
y'all
everybody.
at the expo. Mhm.
Yeah, we'll see you at the expo.
Right.
Booth 244. Come say hello.
Will do.
Buy a t-shirt.